Today's news poll in The Australian continues to bring bad news for the Albanese government. Labor's primary vote has plunged to just 29%, putting it neck and neck with One Nation. The coalition continues to struggle on just 18%, ahead of the Greens on 14%. There is some good news for Anthony Albanese, though, in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. He's sitting on 46%, ahead of Pauline Hanson on 31%, and Angus Taylor on 23%. The rise of One Nation is impossible to deny, but now students from private and public schools are planning a nationwide protest on Thursday called Students Say No to Hanson. To find out more about the protest and the concerns of students, I'm joined by Year 12 student organiser Jules Arpula in Melbourne and Madi Curkovic, a Monash University student co-organiser. Welcome to McKnight tonight, guys. Jules, why are you protesting on Thursday and why are you opposed to One Nation?
Well, as high school students, we're absolutely appalled by her far-right, racist, sexist politics. We are not idiots. We've seen the direction that politics is being, rapidly shaped in society. The fact that the terrain of debate is on the merits of monoculture, if abortion rights should still exist is absolutely disgusting. If this is, what politics looks like after Pauline Hanson has been, being publicized by the media just for 6 months or so, what is it going to look like in 5 years when we're entering the workforce? This is our future, and we want to build actually a mass movement that pushes those politics, the politics of fascism, hierarchy, domination to the fringes of society and fights for the absolute opposite.
Look, I'm a big believer that people have the right to protest. I don't have a problem with that. Does that mean that you think people who support Pauline Hanson are racists? Because you're talking about racism there and a lot of the words you're using.
Mm-hmm. Well, racism has deep roots in Australian society, and Pauline Hanson advocates extremely racist politics, I would say. I don't think that people should vote for her or support her politics. But it just means that we have an even bigger job on our plate if we want to build a movement against this, and one that actually embraces equality and people's humanity instead.
The reason I ask this is because there are some buzzwords that get used with Pauline Hanson, but she's connecting with a lot of Australians who are disillusioned with Labor and the coalition, and they're looking for someone who understands them. We've gone through a period of vast change. People aren't feeling as well off as they were. There's a whole lot of issues. They don't seem to be against immigration, but more the immigration of the wrong people. And that's not a race-related thing. That's people who come here wanting a handout. Do you understand the concerns people have?
Well, who are the wrong people and who are the people who want a handout? I think that people should be welcomed into Australia. We're an incredibly rich country. And actually, if we had to accommodate more people, we should tax the rich. We should actually expropriate some of their wealth. That's the reason why living conditions have been on the decline in Australia. And Pauline Hanson's, one of her biggest political arguments is racist, actually, anti-migrant politics. And we reject the framework that it's just about, the technocratic economic things that migrants and refugees can offer to the Australian state.
Madi, how many students do you participate will come and be part of these protests nationwide?
I think we're expecting several thousand. There's quite a lot of school students who have reached out to us, and also uni students who wanted to organise their own contingents to the demonstrations. There's a bunch of students in Tassie actually that reached out to us, who we don't have any organisers at, but actually reached out saying we would love to absolutely join this protest. So I think we're expecting thousands, which I think tracks. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of students on my campus, and others as well, about what do they think of Pauline Hanson, what do they think about the monoculture stuff, her interview with Tommy Roberts Robinson, her DV comments, and so on. And frankly, most students that I talk to are pretty appalled by it, and they see her politics as pretty vile, and are pretty annoyed about the fact that no one seems to be calling a spade, and a racist, frankly. So I think we're expecting, several thousand on Thursday.
Do you think there's a different line between what you consider racist and what someone else might consider racist? Because I'm seeing comments pop up right now saying Pauline isn't racist. Now, you would obviously disagree with that view, and I appreciate that. But there is a difference of opinion. What are you trying to achieve with these protests? Because people are aware of Pauline Hanson and her politics. What's your hope to come out of this?
Well, let me firstly just say that I think it's a bit insane to think that mass deportations isn't a racist policy, or the idea that white Australia was a good thing and we should bring it back. I think that's pretty unequivocally racist.
Is anyone advocating white Australia? I don't think that's been advocated.
Pauline Hanson was lamenting the loss of white Australia on the Tommy Robinson podcast. It was pretty obvious what she was doing there. So I think that that's pretty unequivocally racist for most people. But I think in terms of what we're trying to do here, we're trying to demonstrate that there is a real opposition to Pauline Hanson's politics. If you're somebody who's an outsider looking in, you might think that, well, there's no sort of concerted resistance. Maybe everyone is either a supporter or a bystander of her politics, which is absolutely not true. Most students who I've spoken to, like I said, think this is vile and racist, and they have to come out and, demonstrate, basically, is what we think. So what we're trying to build is a long-term movement that can push against these politics and stand in solidarity with people like domestic violence victims, with women, with gay people, all kinds of oppressed sections of society that Pauline Hanson wants to give a kick to. She's kicking down, basically, including workers, I think, as well. People keep talking about how Pauline Hanson's a populist. I just don't think that's true. To be a populist, I think you need to be, at least trying to seem to appeal to ordinary people, which she's not at all. She's calling, workers lazy. They should be easier to be fired and so on. So just to address that,
why does she connect? Why is she polling so well?
Well, I think that where her rises come from has been a radicalisation of the conservative right. There has been a bit of a basis for a vote for Pauline Hanson for quite a while. If you look back to the federal election, the last one that happened, there was a far-right vote that was pretty high, but it was split across a bunch of different micro-parties. And now Pauline Hanson's party has been able to sweep all of that together. And then you add on top of that the decline of the Liberal Party, and then a bunch of this, radicalised conservative base who's been pretty annoyed about, the Liberals not being a useful vehicle for that purpose, and have jumped ship, basically. So I think a lot of that shift actually happened during COVID, when there was mass support for the public health measures, but there was a very loud minority who thought, let's just let it rip. And I think that was a radicalising moment for the far right. So that's what we're seeing happening here.
One thing that springs to mind is the idea that she's just trying to get rid of migrants, but isn't it all about the legality and the illegality of people being here? People who are not contributing to society, who are overstayed their visas and things like that?
I just don't think it's a matter of legality at all. And even then, I think it's a bit of a problem that, there's this distinction between legal migration and illegal migration to begin with. A bunch of the illegal migrants that people rag on about all the time are people fleeing war and persecution. So, Australia's got pretty vast resources. And really the problem with things like housing supply is not really about the migration numbers at all, let alone the tiny amounts of, refugees that come into the country who are actually just seeking shelter, who I think we should, give shelter. That's what a humane society should do. So I really don't think it's a matter of legality at all. I think it's a matter of having basic humanity. But you understand there'd be a lot of people watching this, and I'm sure if I turn my head to the screen right now, I'd see this, that people, yes, there's a humanity obligation, absolutely, but they don't like the idea that anyone just can decide to come here. We have a set of rules in this country. We have a process, and people skipping the queue. If they're really in hardship or persecution, there are fast track ways for them to come here without breaking the rules, isn't there? Well, the most common way that you can get in, the easiest way that you can get in as far as the shortcut goes, is having a shitload of money and owning a business. That's usually the people who have been let in historically through the migration patterns in Australia, in Australia's history. So
there's nothing new there. If you've got money, you get, you know, you can make
that's
things
true.
happen. That's 100% true.
The people who are fleeing war and persecution, though, who it's not like a choice that you would, rather come to Australia on a very dangerous journey on a boat, for example, compared to coming legally. I think if people had the option, they absolutely would. The problem is that the migration system is incredibly punitive. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. And the reality is that if you don't feel some kind of specific skill set that for the Australian economy, then basically you get kicked out. At my university a couple of years ago, there was a tutor that we had who was on a working visa. And what ended up happening was his kid, who he brought along with him, was autistic, and the university basically teamed up with the immigration office to say, fuck it, we're kicking you out, basically, because you're not that useful to the economy. You have this, person who's going to have to receive, welfare payments from the government as attached to you. And so therefore you're a burden on society. So, I think that's a pretty real reflection of how the migration system is all actually just about filling, skills for particular, sections of business, as opposed to who actually needs to come in.
Oh, we're definitely trying to fill a skills shortage. There's no doubt about that. Jules, why is this happening on a school day and this protest not taking place on a weekend? Has there been any pushback from schools?
Well, pushback response depends, but we want to have a school strike because we think that they're amazing, lively protests. We want to go into the city and we want to disrupt. We want to stop the trams, and we want to, in a sense, shake society awake a bit. There's a fascist movement that is growing in this country, and it seems that a large amount of the political establishment and the mainstream media are happy to either kind of sleepwalk through and accommodate that, or straight up just advertise it and be advocates of it. We want to put a complete stop to that, turn it in the opposite direction. We want to also show people, the large amount of people that do oppose Pauline Hanson's politics in Australia, that they're not alone, that there is a movement, and that they should come out and join us.
The most of that I think was fair enough, but why do you want to stop the trams?
Well, protests are meant to be disruptive. I don't think that anything in society has really changed without people, being disruptive. Like, you think of the US civil rights movement, you think of the Soweto uprising to overthrow apartheid in South Africa. You think of the mass movement that we've seen for Palestinian liberation over the past few years. Students have been protesting against this. They've been stopping trams, stopping buses. Millions of workers in Italy went out on strike. And it has a political effect in society. That's what we want to do. We want to build a mass movement against racist, sexist, fascist politics in Australia. We've seen what happens with these types. We've seen Trump's America, the absolute attacks on migrants, legal and illegal, and we refuse to let that come to Australia. So we're going to stand up against it and disrupt.
Fair enough. I personally don't think Australians want to see what's happening in America happen here. I think we're more moderate than that. When it comes to immigration, most parties, except pretty much the Greens, do believe we need to curb the number of immigrants coming to Australia. I assume you disagree with that?
Well, yeah, I think it's mostly accommodation to a bunch of far-right talking points that have been radicalizing over the past few years, like Madi outlined. It was the Labor Party under Julia Gillard who reintroduced mandatory detention for refugees in this country, which I think is appalling. We oppose that. We're for people coming to Australia being accommodated. Like Madi said, we have actually more growth in housing stock, more houses being built than people who are migrating to this country. So it's actually, quite a fabrication and quite a lie, I would say. And the actual blame for any of this lies at the hands of big business, the ruling class, and politicians who consistently make decisions about running society that prioritizes profit over human need.
Are you saying there isn't a housing crisis?
Oh, I'm saying that the way that it is framed in mainstream politics in Australia is incredibly right-wing, is racist, is anti-migrant, and is basically serves to totally distort the the reality. There's no supply problem in this country. We saw that in
young
COVID,
people
they
can't
housed
afford a home.
everybody.
How are you going to pay for a home?
That's an affordability problem, not a supply problem, though. Like the fact that rents are incredibly high, and even buying a home now, despite the fact that prices are down, it's mostly down for the really expensive places. If you're a first-home buyer, the problem is not the supply; it's the actual price of the house.
Doesn't that come because of supply and demand? Isn't that what rises prices? And I'm not trying to be a smart ass here. I'm really interested in what you guys are saying. And you guys seem far more intelligent than me, you know. I'm a 53-year-old white man. I'm sure I have no relatability to you guys at all. And I find myself confused about what's happening. I do care about people and humanity and all that kind of stuff, but I am someone who sits here. I don't believe in an open border. I just don't. I do believe that we need sustainability. But my take from you is that you would completely disagree with me, Madi, that there's a sustainability problem.
Well, the sustainability problem doesn't come from the migration numbers, though. The sustainability comes from the fact that the government refuses to build like housing that's actually affordable. For one, I think it's a disgrace that all the public housing units in Victoria are being knocked down. I think instead those should be built up. And also the whole fact that there is a affordability crisis is a problem in itself. The reason for that is that the property developers have been able to, and the investors as well, have been able to run amok for quite a long time. And so I think what we're seeing is basically a problem of government policy stretching all the way back to Howard. So I think if there were actually, price controls, you seized all the empty houses, that would be, a step in the direction of actually trying to fix this problem, which is a much broader issue really of housing being something that's bought and sold on a market, a commodity, as opposed to something that's a right. Why should housing be a privilege? That's the way I see it.
I agree. Housing shouldn't be a privilege, but let me ask you this one. Andrew Bolt maintains that you're being played as pawns by violent extremists. He warns of potential danger, pointing out the involvement of Yasmin Johnson, who is a member of the Socialist Alternative and advocates violence. Madi, are you a member of the Socialist Alternative, and what do you think about what Andrew Bolt has said?
I am a member of Socialist Alternative very proudly. And I think that what Andrew Bolt is saying about extremism is pretty rich, given the fact that I think the real extremist here is Pauline Hanson. I think the fact that he's trying to shift the terrain back onto, what are these young people saying? And as far as the extremism of Yasmin Johnson goes, what he's referring to is that she went to the Royal Commission into anti-Semitism and went up and said, actually, hey, I don't think that the Palestine movement is at fault for, the horrific shooting at Bondi, which has been the overall political narrative that has been pinned onto the Palestine movement, which is a ludicrous demand for people who are, saying that we want to end genocide, that somehow we're the violent extremists. I think that's wholly insane. And I think that it was a good thing that Yaz went to that Royal Commission and spoke truth to power. I think that was a really valuable contribution to society. So, that's what I think.
If you support Palestine, does that mean the events of October 7 are okay?
No, I mean, no one's ever said that. What we're saying is that Palestine should be free. What we're talking about is a population, especially in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, that have been denied of their right to have their own state. They've been constantly, genocided over the last couple of years, and even stretching further beyond that as well. They've been pushed off of their land. What we're demanding is equal rights across the entirety of Palestine. That's what we're talking about. I think it's a bit of a stretch to then add, October 7 onto that.
Do you think, though, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism? You talked about the Royal Commission into anti-Semitism, and people, Jews have been called baby killers, genocide supporters. do you think that's okay? I mean, what's your reaction when you hear things like that? There are people, you know, I don't think both sides are bad. I don't think both sides are good. I think people are just people mainly. But having those things hurled at you as an innocent bystander, I struggle with that, especially when it's happening here in Australia.
I mean, here's the thing that I think is the problem with this entire discussion is that constantly when there is a party that is protesting or demonstrating in some way against injustice, whether that's against genocide, against the rise of the far right, the focus is not on the genocide or the far right as the problem in society. It's always the activists that are being demonized, and I think that's no coincidence, really. So, like I actually just think that the main problem with what's actually going on in Palestine to begin with is the actions of the Israeli government. Let's be clear on that. And I think that their intentions have been absolutely clear. It has been to systematically wipe out Palestinians in Gaza and also push off a bunch of people off their land in the West Bank. So I think that's a really important thing to be clear on. But also, I just think it's a bit rich, really, that the conversation keeps on, shifting onto the terrain of, oh, well, what are these protesters saying, moralizing about basically how they phrase things. Every single demand that we've put forwards, especially in the Palestine movement, has been, demonized in some kind of way, which I think it's a problem that nobody's looking back at what's being done by the Israeli government or, in this case, Pauline Hanson, what she's saying, which is objectively very extreme, calling for mass deportations, saying that, domestic violence victims, it's a two-way street. That's a pretty extreme thing to say, and I think should be the actual subject of conversation here.
Okay, Jules, it's your ideal world. What would that look like? What's your utopia? What would you like to see as far as what Australia becomes?
Well, I think a world without, domination, war, oppression, hierarchy, all of the things that Pauline Hanson champions and is basically advocate number one for in Australia. We're against, bosses having increased rights to fire workers whenever they want. We're against the right of women to bodily autonomy being stripped from them by the state. We're against, extreme increases in deportations, punitive violence upon migrants, refugees, etc. Because we're actually for a world where humans are liberated, are free, are equal. And we think that this protest is an important step in ensuring that the world does not go backwards, does not go even further away from that potential reality. And so we think it's incredibly important that people join us on Thursday and, become involved in this movement.
And Madi, what about you? What would you like to see?
I would like to see Pauline Hanson be even more shocked than she already is about students coming out to demonstrate against her and her racist politics and everything in between. So I think what I'd like to see is a mass movement against Pauline Hanson. I would like to see her politics long-term marginalised. I think, the reference to what's happening in the rest of the world, especially in America, is a really good example of why we actually need to fight. And so what we're trying to build here is a long-term movement that can actually have the force and have the confidence and the politics to resist Pauline Hanson and the rise of her political force in the long term, which I think is important because it's not just a matter of, the opinion polls, it's a matter of who actually has force behind their politics. And unequivocally, Pauline Hanson's got more now, which is a real problem. She's got a bunch of really high-profile defections from the Liberal Party, from sections of business who really support her and have been giving her support this entire time, especially recently. So I think that what we need to see is a long-term fight back against her, really. So that's what I want to see.
Based on the polling numbers, that's unlikely to happen. I mean, Victoria's going to be the litmus test in November. How will you feel if she starts getting more seats and becomes a major political power force?
I just think that's a reason to resist still. I mean, the thing is that, what I said about political force before matters. And I think that for left-wing people, for progressive people broadly as well, those people need to put themselves out there and say, hang on, no, I'm going to draw a line in the sand. I'm going to protest against Hanson. I'm going to cast my vote to the left, and I'm going to, reject the overall shift of the Overton window to the right, which is, I think, exactly what's happening. So, I think that it is true that the rise of Pauline Hanson is not some one-off, and I think what we're seeing is something quite different to what we saw in the 90s with the rise of Hanson at that time. And so what I think that requires is a much more determined fight. So what I'm saying is it has to be a bit more long-term. The unions have to be built up, student unions, all the rest of it. So we got to get started is what I'm saying.
As long as they're not the unions that are involved in the big build, because there's a few problems there. Hey, Jules and Madi, I really appreciate you sharing your views here tonight. I know there's going to be a lot of people who agree with you and a lot that disagree, but it's been a fascinating discussion. You are very passionate, and I wish you nothing but the best. Thanks for joining us.